I feel like I'm quiet, quitting my relationship with my boyfriend because he doesn't put in any effort anymore. How to save our relationship? In the early stages of our relationship, everything felt fresh and exhilarating. We have been together for more than 4 years now, and nearly as long we have shared a home. It is strange, though, how familiarity can both deepen bonds and reveal cracks. My boyfriend works 40 hours a week in a physically demanding job, while I work a slightly shorter week at 32 hours, seated at an office desk. I spend hours processing reports, organizing tasks, and facing the drain that working in a stationary environment can bring, especially for someone with ADHD. My life's history of depression and anxiety feels like an ongoing battle, sometimes manageable and other times overwhelming. Recently, I am even in the process of exploring a potential autism diagnosis, which could explain a lot about how I have coped, or sometimes failed to cope, with life's challenges. He, on the other hand, is full of energy. I used to think his energy was infectious, something that would motivate, keep me active, and maybe in some ways it did at first. But now it feels almost impossible to keep up. He cannot sit still. It is as though his mind and body are always on the move, always craving activity, while I often feel drained and need time to recharge. For him, coming home from work doesn't seem to sap his strength. Instead, he's often looking for the next thing to do, while I'm left mentally and physically spent. My fatigue is not something I can shake off. It runs deeper, tied to my mental health, the energy-sapping effects of depression, and the relentless demands of a brain that struggles with both attention and motivation. These factors feed into what has been a slow but clear shift in our relationship dynamics, one that I have felt more acutely over the past 2 years. The signs have been subtle but unmistakable. It is as though his effort has dwindled over time. He used to be attentive, actively engaged in nurturing our relationship, but these days it seems as though he has taken a step back, settling into a rhythm that feels increasingly unbalanced from my perspective. Perhaps this gradual decline is a natural effect of time. Relationships settle after all, but this doesn't feel like settling into comfort. It feels more like a loss of consideration, a fading of the small daily actions that once made me feel seen and valued. And with my ongoing struggles, his reduced effort is like another weight on my shoulders. One of the areas where this imbalance is most pronounced is in the division of household chores. It may sound mundane, but it has become a genuine point of contention. I am not unreasonable. I understand that he works longer hours and his job is more physically demanding than mine. But we split the bills 50-50. And with my own limitations, I don't believe it is fair that the chores largely fall on me. My energy reserves are limited, and while he seems to possess endless reserves of vigor, mine are often depleted by the time I get home. Despite this, the responsibility for laundry, cooking, cleaning, and organizing our shared space seems to rest squarely on my shoulders. I've explained to him countless times how overwhelmed I feel, and I've shared with him the difficulties that executive dysfunction brings, how starting and completing tasks can sometimes feel like scaling a mountain. But these conversations seem to fade into the background, leaving me to shoulder the load alone. The laundry is a prime example. I find myself doing nearly all of it. In an attempt to push back slightly, I started reducing the amount of his laundry that I do. But this tactic only seemed to result in piles of unwashed clothes scattered around the apartment. Living in a mess is deeply uncomfortable, but it seems to make little impact on him. Our small apartment feels even smaller when cluttered, with laundry baskets overflowing, and yet it seems I am the only one troubled by this. Cooking has followed a similar trajectory. Initially, I enjoyed preparing meals for us, finding small joys in planning our dinners and trying out new recipes. But as time went on, I realized that I was the primary, if not the only person cooking, so I began cooking less frequently, hoping he might step up, take an interest, or at the very least recognize the gap I had left. This rarely happens. Instead, our dinners have become a haphazard collection of quick fixes. Takeout, sandwiches, and his staple, pasta with pesto. Sometimes he opts to have chocolate or nothing at all, and while I understand that everyone has those days, I hoped he might take initiative in the kitchen, or at least understand the effort I had been putting in all along. Grocery shopping is another area where his involvement is nearly non-existent. He does make trips to the store, but they are almost exclusively for himself, a snack or a beer. He rarely considers what we need as a household, whether we are running low on essentials like bread, milk, or even basic items such as shower gel. There have been instances when we've been out of necessities for days, and it doesn't occur to him to replenish them. This lack of awareness can make me feel like I am carrying the mental load of running our home on my own, like I am the one who must constantly think ahead and plan for both of us. I am at a loss as to why these tasks seem invisible to him, or why they feel so weighty to me. Perhaps it's because I find organization challenging as it is, and when I lived alone, I had a system that worked, a way of putting things in place that, though unorthodox, kept things orderly in my own way. But now, with 2 people in the apartment, that system doesn't hold up. The clutter builds up, and I am the only one who tries to put things back where they belong. This disarray only adds to my stress, amplifying my feelings of being out of control. The constant clutter feels like a physical manifestation of my mental state, an external chaos mirroring an internal struggle. I cannot relax in our home because the mess is always there, demanding to be dealt with. These accumulated frustrations have only worsened my executive dysfunction, making it harder to keep up with daily tasks. Some days I find myself frozen, unable to muster the motivation to leave the house, and spending countless hours lost in thought, feeling stuck in place. I know there are things I need to get for our apartment, items I want to buy to make our home feel more comfortable, but I can't seem to act on these intentions. There's a small project I wanted to start in the kitchen. Nothing too complicated, just a simple improvement to make our space more functional. When I mentioned it to him, he took over the planning, saying he would buy the materials himself because my approach wasn't, in his view, efficient enough. That was 6 months ago, and he still hasn't followed through. It's another unfinished piece of our life, left hanging, a daily reminder of intentions that never turned into actions. It is hard not to feel disheartened by all this. We've been together for so long, and yet the person I thought I could lean on doesn't seem to see or understand the weight I am carrying. I'm not asking for grand gestures. I just want partnership. I want to feel as though I'm not alone in maintaining our home, in planning for our future, in managing the small daily details that make up our life. I want him to recognize the effort I put in, to step up and share in the work, and to show me that he cares enough to make things easier for both of us. In the beginning, our relationship was marked by moments of shared effort and mutual understanding. But over time, I have felt increasingly isolated, as though I am the only one holding up our end of things, while he moves through our shared life without seeing the toll it takes on me. The person who once seemed so attentive and engaged now feels distant, as if the responsibilities of our life together are mine alone to carry. This isn't the future I envisioned when we moved in together, but it is the reality I am facing now. Living together in a shared space has turned out to be so much more challenging than I had ever anticipated. One of the biggest challenges, which might seem trivial to some, is organization. When I lived alone, I had my own unique system for keeping things in order. It wasn't a perfect system, perhaps, but it worked for me. Each item had its place, and I knew exactly where everything was, even if it looked haphazard to others. But with 2 people in the household, my system fell apart. Items were constantly out of place, and the apartment started to look chaotic, which only added to my stress and sense of disorder. To anyone who thrives on organization, this mess would be difficult enough. But for me, someone whose brain is wired to rely on order and routines for mental clarity, the clutter is overwhelming. It's not just a small annoyance or a passing irritation. It's like a persistent buzzing in the back of my mind, making it nearly impossible to focus on anything else. I crave structure and a sense of predictability, but with our home in a near-constant state of disarray, my mind feels scattered. Every item left out of place feels like a physical manifestation of the things left unfinished, unaddressed, or ignored. And I am the only one making any effort to return items to where they belong, even though I struggle with organization myself. It's not that I don't try to keep up. Every time I attempt to organize or clean, I end up feeling like I'm just managing symptoms rather than solving the problem. His stuff sits wherever he leaves it, and it's left to me to either put it away or let it pile up around us, which I hate. This endless loop of clutter, followed by attempts at organization, followed by more clutter, has only worsened my executive dysfunction. The toll it takes on my energy and motivation is immense. Some days it feels like I'm trapped in a freeze mode, unable to move forward or tackle even the simplest tasks. Just leaving the apartment can feel like a monumental effort, as if I'm tethered to this cycle of mental and physical inertia. There are things I'd like to do to improve our space, ways I've thought about adding touches that could make our apartment feel more like a home. But even those projects have become sources of frustration. Take, for instance, a small kitchen project I'd been looking forward to. I had carefully thought about what we would need and had even sketched out a plan. When I brought it up to him, though, he brushed it aside, saying he would handle it because my approach wasn't quite right in his view. That was 6 months ago, and he hasn't lifted a finger to make it happen. I feel as if I've been pushed aside in my own home, my attempts to make things better met with dismissal and disregard. His lack of follow-through on something that meant a lot to me feels like yet another instance of his declining investment in our shared life. But the lack of emotional connection and intimacy has been the hardest part to bear. Over the years, our relationship has drifted from one of romance and passion to something closer to a mere cohabitation. We spend a lot of time in each other's presence, yes, but the warmth, affection, and mutual appreciation we once shared feel like distant memories. Small gestures that once made me feel loved and valued have disappeared. He rarely, if ever, tells me he loves me without prompting. I can't remember the last time he surprised me with flowers or left me a sweet note. The thoughtful acts of kindness and appreciation that used to make me feel special have evaporated, replaced by a lack of attention that makes me feel increasingly invisible. This absence of romance has seeped into every part of our relationship. His friends treat me with more courtesy and attentiveness than he does. When they're around, they listen when I speak, they ask if I need help, and they treat me with a respect and attentiveness that I no longer receive from him. I never thought I'd find myself feeling uncomfortable around his friends, noticing how much more considerate they are towards me than he is. It's a sobering realization, one that drives home just how deeply this gap has grown between us. Our physical relationship has suffered too. 2 years ago, he went through a phase where he was watching a lot of porn, something he didn't hide, and during this time, he consistently turned me down when I tried to initiate intimacy. It was a rejection that I felt deeply, and over time, it eroded my confidence. Eventually, I stopped initiating altogether, my self-worth taking a hit with each dismissal. Nowadays, even when I do attempt to initiate, it's often with a resigned and unenthusiastic approach, something along the lines of, "Hey, want to have sex?" It's a far cry from the passion we once had. He doesn't reject me as often now, but the damage done by that earlier phase still lingers, leaving me feeling like I am somehow inadequate or undesirable. The issue is not only about intimacy itself, but about the feeling that I am no longer someone he desires or values. There was a time when I felt truly wanted, when he would make an effort to express his attraction toward me. Now, even when I send him nudes or try to engage in some playful texting, his responses are disinterested at best. He's uncomfortable with receiving messages like that if he's not home, citing that it makes him uneasy to be turned on in public, which I understand. But even when I send him messages or photos when he is at home, he responds with such lukewarm enthusiasm that it leaves me feeling like my efforts were meaningless. I remember sending him photos once, only to come home and realize he'd already forgotten the whole interaction. It's painful to feel as though something that should spark connection and intimacy between us is instead something he barely notices. This dwindling sense of intimacy and appreciation has left me feeling hollow, as though I am reaching out into a void where love and closeness once existed. I try not to think about it too often, as it only heightens the sense of loneliness. It's hard to shake the feeling that I am here, living in this space, sharing a life with someone who no longer sees or values me as a partner. Someone who doesn't realize the toll that this emotional disconnect is taking on me. It's not that I want constant affirmations or grand displays of affection, but I do want to feel loved, desired, and appreciated. I want to be told, I am beautiful, that I mean something to him, that he sees me as more than just someone he shares space with. I want the small, seemingly trivial gestures back, the random, "you look stunning today," or the occasional bouquet of flowers. A reminder that I am still the person he once loved deeply. I crave that connection, that feeling of being valued, but each day it feels like it's slipping further away, lost beneath layers of silence and unspoken words. His lack of attentiveness when I try to talk has become a painfully recurring theme in our relationship. It's not just an occasional lapse or moment of distraction. It's something that happens every day. I try to bring things up in a calm and friendly way, hoping he'll be receptive. But more often than not, I'm met with a half-hearted response, or worse, complete silence. I'll repeat myself once, maybe twice, giving him the benefit of the doubt, thinking that maybe he didn't hear me. By the third time, though, it becomes clear he's not actually listening. He's somewhere else entirely, physically present, but mentally checked out. It's draining to feel as though I'm constantly talking to someone who isn't really there with me, who isn't invested enough in what I'm saying to give me the courtesy of his attention. Over time, this pattern of disengagement has chipped away at my willingness to share anything meaningful. Conversations that should bring us closer only serve to highlight the gulf between us. When I talk to him, it's not just the words he doesn't hear. It's my feelings, my needs, my concerns, pieces of myself that I am trying to offer up to him in the hope of building connection. But he doesn't receive them, and the rejection stings each time, adding to an accumulation of hurt that I carry with me, alone. It's not just about him listening. It's about the weight I feel from shouldering so many responsibilities that should be shared between us. One glaring example is his family's birthdays and other celebrations. I don't mind buying gifts, and I certainly enjoy making a kind gesture when it feels right, but it's become another task he completely leaves to me. If I don't take the initiative to plan something, like a gift for his grandmother or flowers for his mother, nothing will happen. I'll often have to remind him repeatedly, even look up the shops or pick out the items and push him to follow through. It's as though I am the only one who remembers these things, who cares about the gestures that make life feel special. I shouldn't feel responsible for every social nicety and every small act of kindness in our relationship. And it's frustrating to feel like I'm being relied upon to do these things, even when it's for his family, not mine. I have tried to bring up these issues with him multiple times. I've carefully chosen my words, approached him with patience, and tried to express how much this all weighs on me. Each time, though, the result is the same. He shuts down as quickly as possible. He doesn't want to hear it, doesn't want to confront the reality of our problems. The moment I bring up anything uncomfortable, he withdraws. Sometimes he cuts me off mid-sentence, as though he can't even bear to let me finish. Other times he becomes inexplicably angry, his frustration bubbling over in a way that feels so disproportionate to what I'm saying. His anger often manifests as stonewalling, leaving the room or completely ignoring me. It's as though he thinks the issue will disappear if he leaves the conversation unfinished. But that's not how it works. My feelings, my concerns, they don't just dissipate because he's chosen to ignore them. They linger, unresolved, festering in the silence he leaves behind. I remember once, during a particularly difficult argument, he walked out without warning. I was left sitting in the room, mid-sentence, feeling hollow and disoriented. Later, when I tried to revisit the topic, he grew angry, saying we had already discussed it, and that he didn't want to talk about the same things all the time. But we hadn't resolved anything. In his mind, the mere fact that we had started the conversation meant it was done, regardless of whether I'd had the chance to say what I needed to. I can't shake this feeling of incompleteness, of carrying around the weight of conversations left hanging, of never being able to put these issues to rest. What's worse, he can be downright cruel when we do manage to have these discussions. His words cut deeper than he realizes, or perhaps horrifyingly exactly as deep as he intends. I struggled with an eating disorder in the past, something he knows about, something I have been vulnerable enough to share with him. And yet, he has used this knowledge against me, making comments about my body that leave me feeling raw and exposed. He suggested that he'd find me more attractive if I lost weight, under the guise of concern for my well-being. It feels like a betrayal, a weaponization of something I entrusted him with. I know that I don't need to lose weight, that this isn't about my health, and yet his comments have seeped into my psyche, leaving me questioning myself, feeling less than, all over again. When he sees me upset, when he sees my tears, he dismisses me, calling it psycho-terror. The way he says it, with a mixture of disdain and exasperation, makes me feel like my emotions are a burden, something inconvenient that he wants no part of. He's fine with expressing his own anger. Somehow that emotion seems permissible, even encouraged. But sadness, vulnerability, any display of emotional neediness on my part is dismissed, ridiculed, treated as though it's an abnormality rather than a perfectly human response to pain. I am allowed to see his anger, his frustration, but he has no patience for my sorrow or my needs. It's an unbalanced exchange, a relationship where only certain feelings are valid, and mine seem to hold no place. There have been times when he has promised to make changes, pledges to do better, and for a fleeting moment I find myself hopeful. He'll say he understands the need to show me more affection, to step up with the chores, to make an effort to listen. And for a few days, maybe a week, he follows through. He might do the dishes without being asked, might tell me I look nice before I head out the door. But these gestures are short-lived, fading as quickly as they arrived. Soon enough, everything returns to the familiar pattern. The effort dissipates, and I'm left wondering if he ever truly intended to change, or if he simply said what he thought I wanted to hear to put an end to the conversation. The cycle is exhausting, a spark of effort, a promise of change, and then the slow slide back into indifference. He tells me he's not the type to be vocal about his feelings or to shower me with compliments, as though this is simply an immutable part of his character. But I remember the early days of our relationship when he was different, when he would tell me I was beautiful, when he would compliment me and make me feel truly desired. There was a time when he'd look at me with admiration, when he'd express his feelings openly, and I felt genuinely loved. It wasn't something I had to coax out of him. It was natural, effortless, a part of who we were together. Now, when he says he's just not that type, it feels like a convenient excuse, a justification for his unwillingness to put in the work. It leaves me questioning so much about our relationship, about the person he used to be, and the person he's become. I can't help but feel that I am holding on to a memory, to a version of him that no longer exists. I've clung to that initial spark, that early sense of connection and love, hoping that he might still be capable of showing me the tenderness and appreciation he once did. But with each passing day, that hope feels fainter, slipping through my fingers like sand. This isn't the partnership I envisioned. I want to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. I want a relationship where communication isn't a battle, where my emotions aren't disregarded, and where I feel safe being vulnerable. I don't want grand gestures or an idealized romance. I want the simple, honest connection that comes from two people willing to put in the effort. But right now, it feels like I am the only one who wants that, the only one who is fighting for us, while he remains content to let things be, indifferent to the hurt that festers beneath the surface of our silence. Every attempt I make to bridge this gap between us leaves me feeling more isolated, more alone in the relationship. The reality that he may never truly understand or care about the depth of my feelings is one I am struggling to come to terms with. And yet, I'm here, still hoping, still waiting for him to see me again, to remember the woman he once loved and to find in himself the willingness to meet me halfway. I'm exhausted. That's the plain truth I've been coming to terms with more and more each day. This quiet erosion of my energy and well-being has been gradual yet undeniable, and it's taking its toll. Where I once fought to keep our apartment in order, to maintain a semblance of control over our shared space, I now find myself just as apathetic as he seems to be. The dishes stack up. Laundry is left undone, and the mess has become an oppressive, constant presence that only amplifies my stress and sense of defeat. I know he sees it, yet he does nothing to change it. Meanwhile, my own willingness to keep up appearances, to play the role of the understanding partner, has dwindled. I feel like I'm slowly disengaging, withdrawing into myself, yet I'm painfully aware that this will only deepen the divide between us. The guilt over my own diminished efforts weighs on me. I feel as if I'm failing us both, failing our relationship by letting things slip. But I'm just so tired. My mental health has taken hit after hit, and I am left feeling like a shadow of the person I once was. I want to care, to rally, to push for something better, but there's this heavy weight of futility pressing down on me. I can't summon the energy to keep the house clean, or take on the mental load of planning our lives. The sense of defeat has bled into my own self-care too, leaving me feeling like I'm neglecting not just our relationship, but myself as well. I used to try. Now I am merely existing, trying to get through each day with the smallest amount of resistance. Meanwhile, he seems to carry on unaffected. He still has the energy to go cycling after work, something I know he needs to decompress. I don't resent him for having his own ways to unwind. I understand that cycling is his escape, his way of finding a release after a long day. But part of me can't ignore the frustration simmering beneath the surface. I'm barely keeping myself together, just struggling to function day to day, and he somehow has energy left over that he chooses to pour into his hobbies rather than into our relationship or home. It's like he has a bottomless reserve of energy and no intention of using any of it to meet me where I am, to contribute to the life we are supposed to be building together. It feels like we're both quietly quitting this relationship, but in vastly different ways. I don't want to give up. I don't want to throw away all the years we've spent together, or the love that still lingers beneath the resentment and fatigue. Our lives are so deeply intertwined, and untangling them would be painful and complicated. I love him truly. That love is part of why this is so agonizing, because I don't want to settle for a life where I am just quietly suffering next to someone who no longer sees or values me. But I don't know how to reach him, how to break through his walls without sparking his anger or succumbing to my own tears. Every time I've tried to broach these issues, his defenses go up, and the conversation spirals out of control, leaving us both hurt and further entrenched in our frustrations. The very idea of having another conversation about this makes my chest tighten with dread, because I know what it will likely lead to: stonewalling, anger, or him dismissing my concerns as overblown or irrelevant. And then there's the issue of my own vulnerability. I can't seem to get through a conversation about these things without breaking down, which only seems to confirm in his mind that I am being too emotional or difficult. But these emotions aren't unreasonable. They're an honest reaction to the pain and disappointment I feel. Still, I don't know how to hold it together long enough to have the serious, grounded conversation we need. How do you tell someone you're losing faith in them, in your future together, without getting overwhelmed by the enormity of it? I don't want this to be a fight. I don't want to force him into making promises he won't keep. I want a real conversation, one where he actually hears me and understands the depth of what I'm feeling. But that seems like a distant dream. He has shown time and time again that he can't handle these kinds of discussions without shutting down or lashing out. I am left questioning how we can possibly find a way forward if we can't even have a simple, honest dialogue without it unraveling. So how do I approach him? How do I tell him that I am at the end of my rope, that this relationship is slipping away from us, and that it's not just me, it's us both, and it's something we need to face together if we want to salvage what's left? I need him to understand that this is serious, that I am not simply being emotional or needy. I need him to see the reality of what our relationship has become and to take responsibility for his part in it, just as I am willing to take responsibility for mine. It terrifies me, the possibility that he won't listen, that he'll dismiss me yet again or accuse me of making a big deal out of nothing. But I can't keep living in this limbo, stuck in a place where nothing changes, where I am slowly eroding from the inside out. I don't want to end things. I want us to work through this, to find a way back to the connection and partnership we once had. But that will require both of us, not just me. And I need him to understand that this isn't something that will go away if he ignores it long enough. Perhaps I need to find a way to express this in a letter or a message. Something where I can lay out my feelings without the immediate risk of a reaction that shuts down the conversation. I could take the time to put my thoughts into words, to share the fullness of what I'm experiencing without the pressure of his defensiveness clouding over me. If he has time to read it, to sit with it, maybe he'll be able to absorb the gravity of the situation without immediately shutting down. But even that approach has its risks. There's a part of me that fears he will read my words and still remain unmoved, that he will continue to brush aside my concerns as trivial or overly emotional. And if that happens, I'm not sure what I'll do. I don't want to give up, but I also can't keep sacrificing my mental health, my well-being, and my sense of self for a relationship that only takes and never gives. In the end, I need to do this for myself, regardless of how he responds. I need to be honest about what I'm feeling, to release the weight of it all, and to give myself permission to prioritize my own needs. Because even though I love him deeply, I'm learning that love alone isn't enough to sustain a relationship if one partner isn't willing to meet the other halfway. And as much as it hurts to face that truth, it's one I can no longer ignore.